Welcome back to another Outlook VBA tutorial. So today we are going to be picking up on Outlook. It's been a long time since we've talked about anything related to VBA and Outlook and basically the same video. So I thought it would make sense to kind of bring back this topic a little bit because I know we didn't really actually go into too much detail about everything, and the Outlook object model is relatively large, so there's definitely a lot of content to cover there. So what we're going to be talking about today is the appointment item. Now, just to kind of give you an idea of, I guess, how many different types of items there are inside of Outlook, if you actually go to the Outlook documentation for VBA, you will find a little section under how-to topics and then items, folders, and stores. And underneath that, you'll find something called Outlook item objects. And this is all the different items that technically you can work with in the Outlook object model. So for the most part, we've only actually covered, I think, one or two. We've covered mail items for sure. We talked a little bit about folders. We talked about the namespace object. But beyond that, when it comes to the actual, I guess, Outlook item objects, we've only really covered the mail item object. And today what we're going to cover is the appointment item object, but then also at the same time, we're going to be talking a little bit about the meeting item object. So you might be thinking, well, they're kind of like one and the two, right? Kind of, but not really. So technically, to make a meeting item object, you have to have an appointment item object to begin with. So the way you can think about it is just because you have an appointment doesn't mean it's a meeting. And just because, well, and basically what you're saying is because it's a meeting, it has to be an appointment. So that's kind of the idea behind this meeting item object, is that you cannot create it on its own. You actually have to create an appointment item object first, then you can create that meeting item object from it. And how you create that is actually setting the status type of that particular appointment item. So we'll go a little bit into detail about that. But with that being said, let's get started. All right, so we're going to create a new subroutine, and just a little bit of a reminder. Currently, I am inside of Outlook, and so if you haven't, what you would want to do is go to your developer tab, and then you're going to want to go to your Visual Basic icon, so that way you can access the Visual Basic editor. So once you're here, you want to create a new subroutine, and so you just do the sub keyword, and then we can just say, something like appointment items, something simple. From here, we need to make sure we declare our variables. So these are going to be the objects that we're planning to use inside of our script. The first one is the Outlook appointment item. This will actually represent an appointment item object. We're going to also attach some recipients to our Outlook appointment item object. And so we're going to create an object variable that represents the recipients collection, because you can actually have multiple recipients for the same appointment item. And if I want to work with just one of those recipient objects, I will create a recipient object on its own. So this is not referencing the collection of recipients, but simply an individual recipient object in that collection. And then from there, we're going to also talk about the Outlook meeting item object. This will be our meeting item object. And then we're going to also talk a little bit about the Outlook recurrent pattern. So this is a recurrence pattern object. So if you want to make this an appointment that reoccurs on a set basis, then this is how you would do it, is you would have to actually manipulate the recurrence pattern object. So just so you know. Okay, so from here, let's do the first thing, which is going to be creating a new appointment item object. Okay, so create a new appointment item object. You're going to set the Outlook appointment item, and you're going to go application, and then you're going to do create item. And then these are all the different items that you can create. Now, naturally, when IntelliSense pops up, it's covering it, but there is one at the top called appointment item. So that's the one we want to create because we're going to be creating an appointment that's technically a meeting at the same time. Once we've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to define basically an attribute about our appointment object. And that's the actual status component of it. And so what we can do is we can take our Outlook appointment item, and there is a property called meeting status. And if we set this to OL meeting, it basically makes it a meeting item object. So it's basically making it this guy right here when you're doing that. So create a new meeting item object. I'm trying to look a little bit into the documentation so you can kind of get an idea of, what's going on. But if you actually read the documentation, they kind of go into detail, I guess, about like how you would go about doing this. So the first thing they mention is they say, like, unlike other Microsoft Outlook objects, you cannot create this object. It is created automatically when you set the meeting status property of an appointment item subject to OL meeting and send it to one or more users. They receive it in their inbox as a meeting item. So the interesting thing about this is technically the interesting thing is basically from our perspective, we can't actually create this new meeting item object. So if we had a meeting item inside of our particular Outlook application, then technically we can directly manipulate it. But right now, because it's just simply an appointment item object, it hasn't actually become a meeting item object. And so, you kind of might say, well, why did you even go up here and, declare that variable? Well, not necessarily for the intent of using it in this particular video, but the idea is that if you wanted to, if you have an Outlook meeting item object inside of your inside your actual Outlook application, then this is how you would kind of start the pattern with it. If this is something where people want to go into more detail about an Outlook meeting item object, then what we can do is I can kind of dedicate a video to that, and we can talk a little bit more about how we would manipulate that object specifically. There's obviously some commonalities related to the appointment item object, but there are, some little specific things that are related to it. So you just got to keep in mind they're kind of used interchangeably, but you have to recognize that you don't technically get this item until it's sent. So that's kind of the big caveat behind all of this. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've set our meeting status, we've made it an OL meeting, let's kind of just define some attributes about our particular appointment. So we will give it a subject line. So this is just something so that way people can see it. And we'll say, oh, look, appointment item, and we will go to the subject property, and we'll just give it something like new employee meeting. All right. And we'll make sure to give it a location. So we'll say, oh, look, appointment item, and then we will do location, and we'll just do something like conference room ABC. So you can actually give it a location. I don't actually know if you can create like a Teams meeting from VBA, so I don't know how that exactly would work. I'll try to do a little bit more research into that and see if there is even actually a way of doing that, but if not, then that might just be one of the things of, the reality of VBA is that some aspects are not going to be available to it. So we also want to give our appointment a start time. Give a start time. So again, oh, look, appointment item, and there is a start property. And then what this one can take is basically a date time object. So let's just say I want it for Tuesday, 2020, and we'll want it for, 8 a.m. Nice and early to get everybody frustrated in the morning, because everybody likes having early morning meetings. Okay, so then we're going to give it a duration. So give it a duration. So this basically specifies how long do you want this particular meeting to go, or appointment. And so you go to the duration property, and it's in minutes. And so we're going to be saying this is a 90-minute meeting. And then from here, we can also set a reminder time. So we can set the reminder time. And so we'll say, oh, look, appointment item. And we'll do the reminder, where is it? Reminder minutes before start. And we can do something like, 30 minutes, saying, hey, okay, 30 minutes before the meeting starts, send out a reminder to everybody. And then from here, we can also add some recipients to our wonderful meeting. So this is basically adding individuals who we want to attend the meeting. Now this is going to be referencing our wonderful objects up here. Now, technically, I'm not going to be using the recipients collection initially, but I can kind of show you what that would look like from our perspective. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is let's add a required recipient. Let's add a required recipient. So this is somebody we're saying they have to attend. So we'll say, oh, look, recipient. So we'll say recipient. And then we'll say is equal to, oh, look, appointment item. There is a recipients collection that we can then call the add method. And then we basically just give the name of the recipient that we would like to add. Now, once we have that recipient, we can set the recipient type. So we can say, okay, we have our wonderful recipient, set the recipient type. And so when we do that, there is a type property. And if we set that type property, you can do OL, where is it? Required. It's supposed to be OL required. So this is basically saying this individual is a required recipient. So we are saying they have to attend. And then from here, we basically can just add a bunch of different types of recipients to give you the idea of the different types of flavors out there. So naturally, if we have a required one, there should be an optional one. And so we'll just call him Bob Gates 2. And with this one, I want to do that one. We can say, okay, this guy right here, he will be OL, and then we'll say optional. Okay, so this one will make it an optional recipient. And then from here, there's also a recipient considered a resource. So this could be something like a conference room. So if you work in like a big corporate office where you want to basically like say, oh, this is the resource I'm going to be using, then you would set the resource recipient type. And so this one would be our resource recipient. And this one will just be our conference room. So we'll call it conference room ABC. And then from here, what is it? Oh, it's OL resource. OL resource. So that's pretty straightforward. So we've got required. So that person has to attend. Optional, they don't have to attend. Resource is basically defining the the conference room that we're going to be basically using. And then there's also this last one called organizer. So this is the individual who is organizing the event. And so I'll just make it myself for the time being. And we'll say, okay, it's Alex Reed. Okay. And then we'll do OL. Where is it? Organizer. There's an originator one? Where's that one? Hold on. I didn't see that one. So now I'm curious. Yeah, there's a lot to it. I mean, there's a ton of different objects. I mean, it's a pretty large, object model. But it's definitely, there's a lot to it. And, it's just interesting to see kind of how it's all organized and, why they did one versus the other and stuff like that. But, it's interesting. Oh, that's what it is. So it looks like the recipient type changes on the particular Outlook item that you're working with. So if you're on a mail item, then your recipient type could be a carbon copy, blank carbon copy, to originator. And then obviously it's like a journal item. If we have a task recipient type, this is just kind of giving us an idea of the different flavors of recipient types out there. So some might be restricted based on the particular Outlook item object that you're working with. So because we're now working with a OL meeting item object, we're kind of restricted with the types that we can set with it. So, that kind of naturally makes sense. Obviously, if it's if it's not a meeting, we shouldn't be able to, attach a recipient type that would be associated with the meeting component to it. So that's just, more information to you. So now just imagine for a second, like, okay, I want to, take that recipient collection and work with it. So you can say, oh, look, recipients is equal to, oh, look, appointment item. You can do the recipients collection, and then you can say for each, oh, look, recipient in, oh, look, recipients. I hope I spelled all that right. If I didn't, it's whatever. So here, grab the recipients collection from the appointment item object. And then from here, loop through each recipient. Okay. Don't you love when you're trying to spell and it just doesn't go the way it works? Oh, look, recipients. Let's just maybe print out some information. So maybe we want the, we'll just get the type. We'll keep it simple for right now, but hopefully you can kind of see here, there's obviously different types of information. We can do things like the auto response property. Some of these might just be read only. Some of these might be you can read or you can set that particular property, but just to kind of keep it simple at this point, we'll just loop through each recipient and then see the recipient type. It's probably going to just be a number. It's not going to be the actual name up here, because normally when we loop through it, it's not the enumeration behind it. Okay, so we've now set the different recipients. Let's set the recurrence pattern. Now the recurrence pattern's a little bit tricky. The first thing you actually have to do is grab the recurrence pattern object from the the appointment item object. So grab the recurrence pattern object. So we'll set our OLOOK rec pattern equal to the OLOOK appointment item. There is a get recurrence pattern method. And so with this one, this will actually get that recurrence pattern object that we can then use and set some properties behind it. Okay, so first, let's have this meeting recur monthly. And so we'll say, oh, look, pattern, and then you can do the recurrence type. There is monthly, monthly nth, weekly, yearly, daily, so on and so on. We'll just keep it monthly for right now. Now the nth one would be like every 2 months, 3 months, whatever you want to define there. When do you want this recurrence to start? So you can define the start date. And so we'll say, okay, oh, look, recurrence pattern. There is a recurrence pattern start date. This one is just a date data type. So we'll just say, okay, start on the 28th, go from there. And then what we can do is then define the end date. And so we'll say, oh, look, recurrence pattern, ooh, not that, pattern end date is equal to, and we'll just put it like, I don't know, next year, just to make it long enough that we can see it. And then again, where did I do it? Oh, but yeah, sorry, I was looking at my notes. I got a little confused, but this is basically how you work with a recurrence pattern object. Now, even though we've set these properties, there's a big caveat we have to do, which is we actually have to save the appointment item object in order for us to actually see this information once we display it. So if I was to display it right now, you wouldn't actually see anything because we didn't call the save method. So before we do that though, I'm going to set the body. So we're going to say set the body of our particular appointment item. Now, this one, unfortunately, I had a little bit of trouble with it in the sense of Normally with like a mail item, there is a HTML body property that we can set, and then we can do all sorts of kind of fancy stuff related to like, oh, okay, we want this to be like bolded. We want this one to be like, like a header or stuff like that. With this one, there isn't really that. We can set the body format type, but we can't actually set the HTML body properties. So unfortunately with this one, we're a little bit more restricted, but if I come across a solution to that, I will gladly post it. Now this one, I'm just going to set the text to make sure to attend this meeting in nice bold font, right? Nah, we'll keep it calm. And then there is an item, and then there is a body format. And then this one, you have rich text, plain, format, and HTML. So depending on how your application is set, you might actually have a default one that's different. Mine's HTML by default, but some people might just have plain text. I've seen that before too. So here's the important thing though. We want to make sure we save our appointment item. And so that just means we have to take our Outlook appointment item object and then call the save method. And then finally, we also want to make sure we can see it. So let's make sure we display it. And so we'll say Outlook appointment item, and then we'll do display. So just a big recap. First thing is we declared our variables. We created a new appointment item object, and then we set the meeting status property. Now, what this will do is once that meeting is sent to someone else's mailbox, it becomes a meeting item object. So technically the entire time you are working with this object, or when you're creating this new meeting item object, it's an OL appointment item object. So very important to understand that it's an appointment item object until you send it off. And at that point, in that other person's mailbox, it becomes that meeting item object. So then if that other person wants to work with that meeting item object, they can, but it requires them receiving a meeting item object. So that's kind of the big caveat with this one is it's a little bit misleading because you would think like, oh, we can just work with it directly, right? No, technically we have to receive one. And once we have one in our mailbox, we can actually then work with a meeting item object. And then the first couple of things that we did is once we created our new appointment item object and we set its meeting status, is we just defined some properties about it, things like the subject line, things like the location, the start time, the duration, and then we also set a reminder for ourselves. And then we added our recipients, and we talked a little bit about the different types of recipients. So there's required, there's optional, there's a resource, and then there's an organizer. So we set all those recipients, and then I just kind of showed you if you wanted to grab that recipients collection, it's very simple. You would just go and grab it, and then once you have it, you can then loop through it and print some information about each recipient. So the recipients collection is always part of that appointment items object, and then obviously with other ones too, it would probably just be again that recipients collection. So a mail item. I don't know, was it note items or something like that? I can't remember. And then we also talked about recurrence patterns. So if we want to make this meeting reoccurring, we have to first grab the recurrence pattern object. Once we've done that, we can set properties about how frequently we want it to recur, when we want this recurrence pattern to start and end. And then also just, again, to kind of give you a little bit more info on the topic, if you actually go in here, there's a ton of different information related to day of month, duration, end time. So you can obviously make these very specific, and you don't have to necessarily follow what you set up above with the original item. But it's just letting you know there's actually a lot there that you can play with and stuff like that. So you're not necessarily restricted to what you created the appointment item with. Then we also talked about setting the body, and then we also talked about how we have to save it, because if we don't save it, then we're not going to see any of the wonderful recurrence pattern stuff that we saw. So with that, let's see what it finally looks like. You can see here, it just simply printed out some information about the recipient type. But the nice thing here is you can now see all the information that has been basically created about it. So they're talking about the resources, the required one, the optional ones, the conference room, the body, and then we also, if we wanted to, we can edit the reoccurrence if we wanted to, but you can see now that it's actually said it's going to start on Tuesday and then it's going to end on Thursday of next year. And then we also have things like the duration. It kind of just kept the original one that we sent. But again, if we wanted to, there's nothing stopping us from actually changing that recurrence object. One thing here that you might not see initially is you're going, well, where's the organizer, right? The organizer is there. It's just that they're kind of hidden and you have to go to the scheduling assistance to see it. And if you don't, that's basically why you're not seeing. The organizer is actually not shown on the actual appointment item object. But if you go to the scheduling assistant, you will see it right there with you. And then also, there's other things you can do with your appointment item, like formatting the text and stuff like that. So with that being said, though, that actually finishes up this wonderful video. So this is hopefully kind of a start of a new focus on the Outlook VBA object model. I think with our next one, we're going to talk about the calendar item object, and we're going to go a little bit more into detail about what that is and kind of how we can work with it and stuff like that. And then, we can kind of just look and see what's there. Where is it? So we'll probably do contact item. That's probably a really popular one. Never seen the report item one. It's kind of interesting. Oh, interesting. Never heard of that one. It just goes to show you how many emails I send in my day. I actually send a lot, but apparently it's not fancy enough. But yeah, so that's just kind of what you can expect for like the next couple of videos related to the Outlook VBA series. Is we'll probably just start going through the different types of Outlook item objects. And then from there, we'll start kind of going into maybe some more of the very specific objects that might exist within a particular item object, and just explore those a little bit more in detail. So at this point, if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments below, and I'll try to make sure and answer them if I can. And then other than that, we will see you in the next video. Thanks again for watching, everybody.